Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Newton. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you so much for agreeing to chat with me today. I really appreciate this. I appreciate your time. When we finish chatting today, the video will convert. I will send you a link to it. Please make sure you watch it and let me know if I may upload it, but watch it carefully to make sure that we both don't get ourselves into anything
No
dangerous.
problem. No problem.
Absolutely. So will you please tell us your name?
Sure. I'm Rick Bailey, and I am the sitting president at Northern New Mexico College. Located here in Northern New Mexico, we have two campuses in Española and El Rito, New Mexico.
That's wonderful. Congratulations on being the president.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's been an honor. It's been an honor. I've really enjoyed it. And actually, Rochelle, I'm transitioning. So next month I will be leaving New Mexico and taking and being of service as the next president of Southern Oregon University.
Congratulations. That's quite a change from one region of the world to other. How are you
It
planning
really
to adjust
is.
to that?
It really is, Rochelle. And we can talk about that this morning. I think that is really going to be because it's a very different institution with different challenges.
Absolutely.
And so, and I'm excited. And I've really, you're interviewing me at a perfect time because I've been very reflective on my time in service here. It will have been about 5.5 years in this role. And so you're exactly right. Very different part of the country, very different challenges.
Absolutely. So you shared a little bit about yourself. Do you want to talk about your journey from where you started to how you became a university president?
That's a great question, Michelle. And it is definitely the path less traveled. I'll put it that way. I actually was the first person in my family to graduate from college. And I am the son of an Air Force family, Air Force veteran. And so we moved around every couple of years as a kid. And I ended up going to the Air Force Academy to kind of, it's what I knew, it's what our family knew. And then I served in the Air Force for 24 years as a pilot, a lot of different things. But I was lucky enough while I was in the Air Force to go to graduate school, and knowing where I came from, I wanted to take every opportunity, and the Air Force was really, really gracious that way to offer chances for higher education. So I was lucky enough to be accepted to Georgetown for graduate school with the Air Force. And so my last assignment in the Air Force, I was a professor at Air University and a dean of students and president of the faculty senate and all these other things. And I really enjoyed the life of the mind. And so as I retired from the Air Force, I had made a deal with my wife, who had followed me around in the Air Force, just like I did as a kid, every couple of years moving, that when I retired from the Air Force, I would start to follow her around. That was kind of the deal that we had. And she had our family roots in New Mexico. And so that's where we were headed. And I didn't have a job or anything, but I was retiring from the Air Force. And I sat, this is a much longer question than you wanted, or the answer than you wanted, Rochelle. I apologize. So I was looking at the back of the Chronicle for Higher Education at the faculty lunch table. I was stationed in Montgomery, Alabama at the time. And here was this job for president of Northern New Mexico College. And so I applied and didn't know a soul out here. And next thing you know, I was fortunate enough to get the position. So, and I've served here, like, as I said, the last 5.5 years, have loved every second of it. So that was my non-traditional path to the college presidency.
Sounds like a wonderful path. Let me ask you a question, because something you said there really stood out to me. You went to your next location without a job. Can you talk a little bit about what that means to step out on faith like that, to really have a belief in yourself that, it's going to work out okay? Because a lot of us struggle with that. I'm afraid to make a leap. I'm afraid to do this because this may not work out. And there is a wonderful book called Who Moved My Cheese, which describes your story almost perfectly.
What a great question. No one's ever asked me that question before, but I love the way you put it. It was a leap of faith. I think you put it right in the question. It was a leap of faith. So at the time in the Air Force, I had two paths. One was to make the decision to retire and move into into higher education, which is where my heart was at the time, or I could have stayed in the Air Force. And by the way, I loved the Air Force. So there's nothing against service to the Air Force. I really enjoyed it. But I will tell you that I was at a place in my life where the challenges and the positions that I would have had likely following that would not have been super challenging. I hope that doesn't sound awful, but I am driven by growth, and I want to challenge myself as a professional and as a person. And so it was a leap of faith. And I'm glad, of course, now on the other side of it, I'm super happy I did it. I will also tell you that a lot of my colleagues in the Air Force, when I said, "Gosh, here's this job in New Mexico," everyone said, "Rick, there's no way. There's no way you're going to do that. No one knows you out there. That's not how this works." But I said, well, I know what happens if I don't apply.
Right.
Like I know what that answer is.
Right.
And so it's very interesting, because once I was selected for that position, all of those people in the Air Force said, "Hey, if he can do it," and all of a sudden now the aperture widened for everybody that said, as long as you're willing to put yourself out there. The other thing I'll say on this, Rochelle, and this is kind of tangentially related to your question, is that I have learned far more in my life from my failures and from things that didn't work out as successes. So I think as long as you're willing to accept that not everything is going to work out the way you planned it, but that accepting that there are stumbles along the way, if you can internalize that and be okay with that, well, then you can really grow and move, because now you're willing to take some calculated risks, not to be reckless, but to take calculated risks to move forward.
Absolutely. And we all know that we would not be anywhere if we didn't fail, right? So the first time we walk, we fall down. First time we ride a bicycle, we fall off. So it takes failure to reach success. And I think that we should appreciate and understand our failures, as opposed to taking them as a defeat or something that says you can't, just that's your next bridge to the next place. And I am not a religious person, but I'm an extremely spiritual person, and I believe in life. They're either blessings or lessons. Those are the only two things.
Oh, I love that.
Every day.
I love that. And do you also see this, Rochelle? I was thinking about this, that there have been times in my life where I have a plan, like I think it's going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. And then something will happen, something that I didn't see coming. And I will be so frustrated by that and angry, and and even challenge my own spirituality. I thought this was the path, what are you telling me? But in hindsight, in every single one of those moments in my life, every single one, years later, that obstacle, that stumble, that whatever, took me into a path that actually ended up in a better place than I had originally predicted. Every single time that's happened.
Every single time. But you have to have the right mindset for that. Because sometimes when we fall, if you scrape your knee or break your wrist or whatever, when you fall, you have to accept that you can try again. And sometimes when we fail and when things don't work out the way we think, we absolutely doom ourselves to that failure. We embrace it and we embody it, and then the next opportunity doesn't come around. But again, I hate to talk about spirituality again, but I will say that the old saying goes, the window is not closed until there's a door open. And so many of us get stuck in the room because we're waiting on the window to open again, and the door is wide open and you can walk right through.
That's right. Yeah, very well put. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So being in the military, as I understand, I don't have a military background. My father was in the military, but that was before I was born. But being in the military and in that life, is it a transition from traditional to military employment, and how things are? So, from what we've learned, military people are typically very disciplined and very organized and follow a defined set of steps. Whereas in traditional life, it's more happenstance, this may happen, that may happen, in the military, if you do your job well, you'll get promoted, you'll get, decorated. But in life, it doesn't work out that way. How do you balance coming from an environment where you knew what your next step was going to be to one where it's more, casual or more incidental?
Yeah, what a great question. When I was, so you're exactly right about the military. It is very rigid. It's very hierarchical. It's very organized. It is the military, almost by design, is built on routine, structure, all of that, because of the business of what the military does.
Right.
And by the way, those aren't criticisms. That's just kind of the nature of the organization. Making that leap into a non-military environment, your question is really thoughtful. I was thinking exactly that, like, hey, a civilian college is a very different organization. And so as a leader, I needed to respect that difference. So there are stories of military leaders who have gone into higher ed and tried to run it like a military organization, and all of them have been spectacular disasters. So I knew that this would likely require a much more nuanced and nimble leadership approach, which I'm kind of built that way anyways. So it was a relatively easy transition. I kind of knew that would be likely helpful. And I also knew that I needed to be humble enough to go into an organization that I didn't know and take the time to learn about what that organization respected and what it valued, and learn from the people who were invested in it. And then over time, do what I could to be an advocate for those values, and to support and to fight for those things to help the organization move forward. And it's been super successful. I think that approach has been really successful. The other thing, Rochelle, I told you my last assignment in the Air Force was as a professor. I taught strategy and strategic thinking, which I loved. And over time, I started to think about what makes strategy. And I've come to the realization that it's really, and by the way, anyone who says there's a blueprint for strategy is probably trying to sell you beachfront property. But in my mind, so this is just my perspective, strategy comes down to two things. How do we understand our environment? And to your question, how do we adapt to uncertainty? Because in life, whether in the military or not, uncertainty is everywhere. Those things that we talked about, those stumbling blocks, they kind of appear. And so if you said it perfectly a few minutes ago, if we create a mindset where we prepare, not just intellectually, but emotionally, for the fact that we don't know everything, and the fact that things are constantly changing, well, then as long as we are ready to be adaptive to those things, then the chances of us being successful moving forward are much, much greater. And so, again, another long answer. I think that was my mindset making that transition from military life to civilian life.
Let me ask you this. How do you see yourself as a leader? So there's been a lot written about the types of leaders there are in the world, and a lot of emphasis has been put on transformative leaders, servant leaders, all of these different types of leaders. But how do you categorize yourself as a leader?
So it's a really interesting question. So I think it's best to look at your own leadership, or describe your own leadership style through the eyes of the people you serve. So I like to think of myself as a servant leader, but ultimately, the other people in the organization are really the ones who are the best reflection of what my leadership is. I very, very much feel, let me say that I try to embody the spirit of a servant leader. I don't rest on titles. I serve as a college president. I serve at the pleasure of the Board of Regents, but I also serve at the pleasure of students and faculty and staff and alumni and government leaders and business leaders and community partners and all of that. And I think and so I will say that it has served me well here, in the sense that when other people know that your heart is really committed to serving not just the organization, but the people in that organization, then you can move mountains. So again, it's not an overly gratuitous, humble answer to your question, but I think that we all try to embody the type of leader we want to be. But to answer your question, ultimately, it will be up to the other people who you serve with to make that determination.
Thank you for that. But I do want to challenge you on that for a minute, because you have to bring something to the table for them to see what you're capable of or what your leadership style is. So I have worked in IT since I was 17, and I'm only 19 now, just for the record. But it's been a very, very long time. And I started out as this type of leader, very dictatorial, focused on the mission. We got to dot the I's and cross the T's, and we got to, keep it moving. As I have evolved over time, I have realized that I want to know if you subscribe to this as well, that you don't manage people, you manage the outcomes, not people. And a lot of people see that, and they try to categorize or at least quantify it to what it might be. But in reality, you are given a set of directions that your organization says they expect you to fulfill. And then you have to fulfill it with the resources that you have. So whether it's your staff or your budget or whatever it is, you have to manage it from that. And so over time, you evolve this, because you got to balance in that, right? Because your board of regents is going to expect you to deliver, and your people are going to expect you to be supportive. So you've got those two things that are almost in opposition to each other, because the people at the top want to make sure you meet the bottom line, that you're doing this, and the other. Whereas on the other side, your people are expecting you to be compassionate, to be patient, to be understanding, and all that stuff. And sometimes they're in conflict. So would you agree that sometimes it's a process that evolves over time, that you don't step into being a servant leader or a transformative leader or whatever type of leader you are, but you kind of evolve, and sometimes you have to refer back, you have to balance. Sometimes you go back to be a transformative, a transitional or whatever, and then you come back to your servant, but it's like a constant balancing act.
Really, really good. The way you put it is perfect. I think that's true. I think all leaders evolve. I think all people evolve, right, in their own way, depending on two things. One, the environment in which they live, work, learn, play, and also the lens with which they interpret their surroundings, right? So many different answers to your question. I think, and let's go back to the military for a second. I served much of my career in the Air Force. I served as a pilot, and a pilot of aircraft that had crews, that had air crews as a part of a larger airplanes. And over time, I kind of realized that my nature was very collaborative. I like one, because I'm never the smartest person in the room, and also because when you work together as teams, likely the outcome is far better. But also as a pilot, and especially as an aircraft commander, and as the one at the controls, there were times where we didn't have the luxury of asking everyone's opinion about something, right? And as the pilot, I had to make a decision. I mean, sometimes life or death decisions, right? So over time, and I think this is how teams can gel over time, I think as a leader, if you can embody that, hey, you really do care about what every other team member thinks about something, but respect the fact that there are going to be times when the leader just has to make a decision. And that sometimes leaders have to make decisions where not everyone agrees, right? And I think that's where, if I would say, that's where the balance is. That's where the balance is in being as collaborative as possible, but understanding that sometimes the leader's just going to have to make a call. I'll also say this, Rochelle, in the time I've been here, there are so many things that we've done at this college that 5.5 years ago I would never have imagined. We've more than doubled our student graduation rate. We've every year we've beaten the 112-year history of the college's record on money raised, scholarships, grant money, all of it. There are so many things that we have done that are just remarkable, but I will say this, and this is not, again, forced humility. None of those things were done because I was the leader. They were done because we collaborated with someone else that helped us make this happen. No, granted, I'm not going to say that I didn't have something to do with it, but I also think leaders need to be very, very careful not to think that it is really solely their leadership that makes something work. I think we all need to remain humble enough to know that it really does, that collaboration, at least for what we do, collaboration is the key to all of it.
So I want to transition and talk about higher education a little bit. So I've spent my last 20 or so years in higher education. And one of the things that I have noticed about higher education is how it has changed.
Mm-hmm.
So from the common good, to make the world a better place, to a more competitive environment, where it's become almost prohibitive for some people to go to college because of the cost, because of how money is managed in higher education. Why has higher education changed in that way? And is it going to continue down that path, or will we come back to that common good, making the world a better place in higher education?
Yeah, what a great question. Let me start off, Rochelle, by saying I don't know. So I'm going to fumble through my guess on this answer, but so I think of education as a social contract, and I think that the thing that has made education interesting in the 21st century is that the 20th century assumptions are no longer valid. So I think in the 20th century, there was a social contract with education in this country generally that went something like this. Public education all the way through 12th grade is free. Public education is free. People graduate from high school. Many of them got jobs, and the high school diploma was enough for them to have a living wage job. Those people then paid taxes. That money gets cycled around so that the education is free for the next person. Like, that was really the social contract. Here's why the assumptions have broken down. One, the assumption that a high school diploma can now provide a lifetime living wage job is pretty rare. I mean, it does happen. So I'm not going to say it never happens, but it's pretty rare. And there's the famous Georgetown study that says that 67% of jobs by 2030 are going to require some type of higher education attainment. Well, that's real now, right? And so your point is very well taken. If we as a country aren't thinking about that social contract differently, well, then we're going to exacerbate the gap between those who have these opportunities and those who don't. Right. I would love to, and by the way, I want to give credit to what's happening here in New Mexico. And our governor and our legislature are very, very serious about thinking differently about a 21st century social contract for education. And that is, let's help everyone at least give the equity of opportunity for them to reach now what is likely kind of that new standard. Right? Whether that is a certificate, an associate's degree, whatever that is, let's think differently about that. The last thing I'll say on this is your question brought up the concept of competition, right? And are we all now as institutions competing for the same students? I have been so fortunate here at Northern New Mexico College, because I think, and I came in thinking this, that we don't have to compete with other colleges for students. We have to compete with the decision about whether or not to go to college, right? That's our competition. So here in New Mexico, we probably have mid 30% of the 2 million people who live in this state who have some type of higher ed credentials. We are so far from the from the 67% mark or whatever it's going to be 9 years from now, that as institutions, we don't need to compete with each other. What we need to do is all work together to bring more people into the higher education system, right? And that's a much different mindset than let's make sure that we're going after this very small pool of prospective students. Let's grow the pool together, and then work together to make that happen.
Let me follow up on that. So early admit, tuition discounting, all of these tools are meant to separate the wheat from the chaff, if you will, so I get the best that it is out there, so this really smart kid that's got a 4.9 GPA, or, has done all this great community work or whatever it is, and this student comes to our college or our university. But in reality, like, how do you measure success if success is only a degree? I had a doctor tell me this once. I was a poor medical student. I barely graduated, but guess what? My diploma on the wall says doctor. And I thought that was an interesting analogy for him to make about his education and his place in the world. And a lot of us could say similar things, but if education is supposed to finish rounding us out, so, if you believe, so elementary education, you go and you just, are bumping and banging into things as you're evolving to the person you're going to be. And you get to higher education and they really fine tune you, almost like the military did you, right? They went from something that was raw and undeveloped to something that is finely tuned in a precision instrument, whether that's a human being or not. You know what my point is. So, but in reality, so many things happen in that process to higher ed. So, my dissertation was on fully online education. Since I'm an IT person, that was the only place I could go with my dissertation. But, completion rates, right? So what makes someone complete? And if you think about Coursera and edX and all these people that came out, early on in this online education model, completion rates were atrocious. I mean, like 5% or something like that. And yet still, as we're moving forward now, more and more people are looking for online resources. And then COVID came around and smacked us completely into the online space, so we have to go to remote learning. And so we're trying to figure out this balancing act between, this type of education versus this type of education. And what's the reason why we are so competitive for students to come to our space or come to our universities? And I can only speak about my two experiences. I worked at Duke and UNC, competitors and all that stuff, but it's still at the same place. They're very competitive with each other, not just in sports, but in so many other ways. And that's just here in North Carolina. If you can imagine what that's like, so the US News ranking, right? So a T14, a T10, a T. What do these values mean to the larger society if the universities are defining what we see as a student and who's going to make us achieve those completion rates?
Great. God, there's so much in your question. Let me start with this. If we step way back, and we stop thinking about competition, we stop thinking about other institutions, we stop thinking about all that. We are all blessed in the sense that all of us who do what we do, that we live the life of the mind, right? The whole point of this is to try and help shape the lens, right? The lens with which someone sees the world, and empower them to work on that, to work on their own lens, and ideally so that it is not a piece of paper hanging on a doctor's wall at the end of the day. It's actually you're planting the seeds for a lifetime of intellectual curiosity and critical thinking and communication skills, all those other things. There really is two diverging theories about the value of education, right? One is the piece of paper, right? What is and there's a superficiality to that, hey, if I have a PhD, that means I'm this. Rochelle, my guess is that probably a lot of people who didn't graduate high school, but who probably are in the same intellectual league as someone with a PhD. I mean, I think you can make arguments like that. but the other part, the other value, and I think really, a lot of people in higher ed really understand and appreciate this, and that is that there are so many intangible things to education, and all of those other benefits in the sense that when you're living the life of the mind over time, you are cultivating this creativity, this thirst for knowledge, this humility, all of those things that are really, really important, not just for scholars, but just for people, right? For us being better members of our community. And so those two things are happening at the same time. I think I've been lucky here at Northern because our entire institution kind of embraced that mindset and said, look, let's stop worrying about competing. Let's look at who we serve, and then let's work like hell to help them reach their educational goals. We are an open enrollment institution. So we kind of have made the emotional commitment that we will, that there are only two requirements to come here. One, you have to have a vision for where you want to go and what you want. And two, you have to be willing to work your tail off. If you have those two things, no matter where you are, then we're going to work with you. And that's a big challenge. That's a really big challenge. Because and this is not an indictment on public education anywhere, but you've heard those two competing interests, right? Are we going to look for college-ready students, or are we going to be a student-ready institution?
Right.
And clearly, we're the other. But your point is well taken, because now, when you make a commitment like that, then in a completely resource-constrained environment, we make the commitment that it's going to take us more to help a student get to the finish line than the 4.9 GPA valedictorian who comes to us, right? We understand that. But I will tell you that the juice is worth the squeeze. I'll tell you that, and that it is a really, really heart-centered, thoughtful, and enriching and rewarding experience to engage in it the way we do.
Let me share a little bit about myself. So I've been accepted to Columbia University, grew up in rural South Carolina, born in New York. So, it's wonderful. I got this opportunity to go to Columbia University. As I was matriculating through the university, there was a white guy standing out there with a pamphlet on the way into the campus. And he says, "We are trying to bring Negroes into computing." Now, that should tell you how long ago this was. Okay. But I never made it to college. So I went with him because he offered me $30,000, and growing up extremely poor and food insecure as I did, $30,000 sounded like $1 million to me, back then. So I didn't go into the college experience at all. I didn't get my first college degree until I was 45 years old. Wow. I got 2.5 degrees in 2.5 years. I was second in the class. There was nothing about college I was prepared for, nothing. As a non-traditional student, working in computers and IT all this time, the work was head down, getting things done, this. Going to school was really challenging for me because I didn't understand any of it. So my first 3 degrees came from a historically Black college, which the experience was absolutely outstanding. I wouldn't trade it for anything. My doctorate degree is from a predominantly white college. The experiences were day and night. But every single step along the way, I felt like the odd man out. I didn't think I was going to complete. I didn't think I was going to stay. Being old, I was very curious. I would ask questions, seek out further detail in the middle of class, and my student colleagues hated it. They wanted to get out as soon as they possibly could. And then when I went to get my doctorate degree, I was in my 50s. I think I was 52 when I started. And remember, I'm only 19. So I was 52 when I started. And in a cohort, this is a leadership, higher education administration leadership course. Everybody in my class worked in higher education in an administrative or an instructional way. I was a technology person. This wasn't, my work was, again, head down, not paying attention to the world around me. And so the first day in class, when the instructor asked us to tell a little bit about himself, we all went around the room and said a little bit about ourselves, where we come from, where we work, all these kind of things. There was a young white guy, so he probably was in his 30s. He said, "You're not going to finish. We're going to finish and we're going to leave you in the dust."
Wow.
I was one of two people who graduated, one of two who graduated within 4 years from start to finish, dissertation done, accepted, defended, out. One of two women, one white woman, one black woman, but two women.
Do you know what prompted him to say something like that?
Because I didn't work in higher education. I had I mean, I worked in higher education. Of course, I was working for Duke University at the time, but at that time, I wasn't an instructor. I wasn't an administrator. I was a manager, a director person, but I wasn't the person that was leading the charge. I wasn't, going out and searching for students and figuring out all these things, where everybody else in the class was doing that. They were in some role in higher education that led them to the interaction with students and the interaction with, the higher ed and its mission. So I was not. And I think the fact that I was one of 3 Black people that were in the class, I was the oldest person in the class or second oldest person in the class. So all of these things were against me, right? I remember I'm only 19, but I was older. And so the point I'm trying to make, or the question I'm trying to ask, is like, for non-traditional students who come out the workplace, because you made a point about people who have a degree and are just as successful as people, or have just as much opportunity as people who do not, something to that effect. In reality, higher education, in my opinion, needs to think about who they admit and what the environment is for them to be successful in that environment. And so my one challenging question to you, for Black and Brown students who are coming into higher ed, maybe not fully prepared, not fully understanding the rigor and all of that stuff, whether it's a traditional or non-traditional student, how do we think about education in a way that makes it welcoming and gives everybody an opportunity to succeed? And I'll just follow it up with the stats that what the dropout rates are for Black and Brown students, what the completion rates are for Black and Brown students. So obviously there is a glitch in the system somewhere, because we don't complete and succeed at the same rates as others. And then when you add STEM to it, it even gets to be a smaller number of completions and completion rates and a higher number of dropouts.
Yeah, there's so much in your question. So let me start with, I have a very, very unique experience here at Northern New Mexico College, because for 2 reasons. One, our student demographic almost perfectly matches the demographic of our region. Here at Northern, 91% of our students are students of color, 91%. So that it is not, we don't have to actively fight to bring more students of color into the institution. It's already here. They are here, and that's fantastic. Now let me foreshadow. Next month, I will be transitioning to Southern Oregon University. Very, very different, where the goal of diversity is not simply let's bring everyone that from around the region. That will have to be a very proactive, strategic, intentional effort, right, to do that. So I bragged earlier about how in the last 4 years we've doubled the student graduation rate. Well, that's not white students who have done, that's our students who have done that. We serve a very, very challenged socioeconomic region here in Northern New Mexico, and yet in the last 5 years, we have a high school equivalency program here at the college. It's a GED program. We have over the last 5 years, 2 of those years, we were the single top performing high school equivalency program in the country here, right? Taking the same students from the same school districts, and there are 2 variables that measure that. One is what's the best program in the country? They look at two things. One, the average score on something called the HiSET test. It's the 5 tests that the students have to take to get their GED. And the second is the percentage of those students who go directly into college or a advanced employment or the military. Let's talk about the HiSET test. In the years where we were the top performing, and by the way, when we weren't the top performing, we were still in the top 3. So it's, we're crushing it basically. And the national average on the HiSET test was somewhere around 67, something like that. We were at 94.
Wow.
To me, that's when the light went on to say that poverty and aptitude are not necessarily related, right? That students will shine when they have the support system they need, and not just resources, emotional support system that they need to thrive. And so, like a long answer to your question, but it was a long question, Rochelle. So I think that the key for us is to make sure that that students from whatever background know, not just feel, but know that they are in a place that values them and values their contribution. The research is clear on the value of diversity in teams, right? And I think there is no better place to exercise that, to enjoy that, than in an institute of higher education. Because when you have people from diverse backgrounds all coming together, the marketplace of ideas becomes richer. It just does. There are ways in which my wife sees the world, because she is a woman and because she is a person of color. There are just things, that lens is just different because of that. And so if we're not not just respecting that, but celebrating that, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. So I think, and this, by the way, you should interview me a year from now, because then I will be in a much it will be in a much different environment where as an institution, as a university, we are going to have to take intentional, active, proactive steps to help enrich that landscape. So that I'm looking forward to that challenge.
Thank you for that. I do want to challenge something that you've been saying. So what is a person of color? Because that assumes that white is not a color. And from my diversity lens, I never accept that I'm a person of color. I'm Black. And I'm always Black. I don't know what a person of color is unless that's the entire spectrum of human population, because we are all a person of color.
Good point. Yeah. Very, very good point, Rochelle. And that, I guess that's the challenge for us, is that we tend to, and I'm guilty of it too, we tend to we tend to use the frameworks of demographics that bureaucracies by which we're measured, right? So whether you say BIPOC, no matter what the term you use, I think you're right in that we're instantly using something that is arbitrary and imperfect and probably not probably, it's blind to the complexities of who we are as people. So I'm glad you challenged that. I think that's a fair critique.
Well, I am very grateful you took time to talk with me today. I hope you will come back and talk with me again. And I hope you don't see this as an interview. This is just a simple discussion about where things go and how things work in life. And I hope you'll come back and discuss it with me again.
I would love to. Anytime. It's been an honor to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we have just a couple minutes. I want to leave whatever remaining time to you to say whatever you may want to say that we did not cover, or to talk about whatever you wish to talk about that we didn't talk about.
What I would love to finish with is how you started.
You
started with a question about how what are the things that maybe we put in front of ourselves that limit the possibilities ahead of us, right? We all have obstacles, and we all, like, that's life. We all have things that we don't plan on that come in our way, and obstacles and things that we have to overcome, and challenges, all of that. What are the things that, because of our own mindsets, we put in front of ourselves?
I
And
think
what
that's
are the, yeah.
I think that's a great question. I was talking to someone about that earlier today. We become shaped by things that we bump into. It's almost like imagining something going down a conveyor belt or going down, if it bumps into the wall, it may get a dent in the corner of the box, or the box bottom may break out or something like that. If you could consider a human being something, not live, but just something going through the motion. And I think that, you know, growing up, you know, we have been taught that these are bad things. One of the things that's really bad is to fail. Don't fail. I think that's an unfortunate thing that we have done. We have put pressures on people to be like somebody else. And specifically where there's no example, no role model. So if, for example, in higher ed, like the number of Black and brown professors, the number of female professors, female presidents, Black and brown, all of these things are not present, we think, well, there must be something wrong with me. As a Black woman, I went through those struggles all the time. I was never the smartest kid in the room, never. But I graduated at the top of my class because, as you said, I believe in working hard. If somebody gives you an opportunity to do something, you work hard at it.
Yeah.
But the problem is that it took a long time to get there for me. It did not come natural to me. I didn't have an advocate or a mentor or a coach, someone that was kind of guiding me. And so as I bumped and banged along through life, I learned that these things that I had been taught were wrong, that they weren't appropriate if I were going to be successful in the world, in a world that did not see me, where I'm completely invisible, or if I'm visible in a negative way, that I had to see myself differently. And that's just simply believing in myself and what I could do. So for example, when I started these diversity chats, and people always kill me about the name, but it's really the story of getting from point A to point B. People was like, why are you doing this? You're not a reporter. You're not trained to do this. This is not what you're doing. But I wanted to provide people a platform where they could go and see other people's stories, to go hear how somebody made it, the struggles that they faced, how they overcame, whether they did or did not overcome, are they still stuck? All of these pieces were in me that I wanted to give to someone else that no one gave to me. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's what a great way to finish this up. So this is a call to your audience, and that is to do what Rochelle just said, and that is take the lessons that she just shared and be active in being a mentor for others. And I'm going to go beyond that and say, not just be a mentor, but be a sponsor.
An advocate, absolutely.
Yes. And so, yes, there are so many things that students can learn from from both of us, right? In terms of our own experiences. And those lessons are important, and we need to keep sharing. Like this platform is a great vehicle for sharing these. But to take the next step and say, hey, Rochelle, I want to introduce you to this person who does this for a living, and this person I really think can help you kind of get to this step. And if this is what you want, and that's active, right? That takes intention. To do it. But the more of us who do that, the better. Last thing I'll say is about, and it's also embedded in your last statement, has to do with risk. Now, and we didn't talk a lot about that today, but I think that leaders of at all levels and at all need to be very, very conscious about risk, and for people like us, especially who have not who've had to kind of on our own go into a world that with which we were incredibly unfamiliar. There is so much anxiety associated with that, right? And we start to, imposter syndrome. Am I really supposed to be here? And all of that. Well, the more leaders can cultivate environments where there is a sense of belonging baked in. That doesn't happen overnight. That takes time. then you can do that. And when it's even outside of a college, of a higher education environment, I would say this for any leader who's watching this. One of the deals I made with our staff here and faculty at Northern New Mexico College early on, I said, hey, if think creatively about how we serve our students and how we do things maybe differently than we have. And if it's a calculated risk, and if you've done your homework, right? So it's not just reckless, but here's something that's a little bit different and it's a little risky for us to do this. If it fails, if we try this as an organization and it fails and it's your idea, I, as the chief executive officer, I will take responsibility for it. I'll be the one to go to the board. Yep, I thought this was a really good idea. But if it succeeds, then you are the one we will sing songs about. You are the one, you are the one that we will celebrate as having the idea. And so I think the more leaders can accept and share in the risk calculation of teammates, the more creative and innovative those teams will be, and the more successful in service to each other and to the organization those teams will be.
Well, thank you for that. But I will say I am known as the connector because I do just that. I pick up the phone call, I send the email, I ask whatever it takes to get people from point A to point B.
Yeah. Well, you're the reason I'm here. So it's clearly it's worked.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you for your service to us, as your military service to us. We are very grateful for that. And, one of the things I think that is one of those disservices is we don't pay people in the military more. We don't make their lives better for what they have done for us, because that's a pretty unselfish thing that they do. They give up their time, their lives, their everything to make this country safe. And I think we should really appreciate and pay those people equitably. Also, that we should pay teachers and other people a fair living wage that says we appreciate what you do and how you make our world better. So first, thank you so much for that. And then thank you for coming and chatting with me today. As I said, I hope you will come back. And I hope as you start your journey at your new university and you have diversity concerns, you'll come and consult with me, because I would be happy to help.
Would love that. Yeah, I look forward to that, Rochelle. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you too. And I will send you a link as soon as this convert. Please watch and let me know if I may upload it.
Will do. Thank you.
Have a great holiday. Stay safe.
You too. Take care, Rochelle.
Bye.